Samuel Chanda was the people's billionaire. A man who owned the skyline but never forgot the soil of his beginnings, but in a single heartbeat, metal screamed and glass exploded. The most powerful man in the city was silenced on a rain-slicked road. Trapped in a deep coma, Samuel was a ghost in his own body. He could hear everything, but he could move nothing. His wife, Lucy, arrived with tears for the cameras. But once the door locked, her mask of grief began to slip. She leaned close and whispered the truth. "If you die tonight, Samuel, I will finally be free." She thought he was gone. She was wrong. Behind those closed eyes, a judge was waking up. The rain in the city didn't just fall, it felt like a heavy, suffocating curtain of iron. On the outskirts, where the gleaming glass towers of the financial district gave way to the skeletal frames of unfinished housing projects, Samuel Chanda stood in the mud. He was a man worth $4 billion, yet he was currently kneeling in the red clay, showing a young apprentice how to properly reinforce a load-bearing pillar. His expensive SUV sat idling nearby, but Samuel didn't care about the leather interior. He cared about the structural integrity of these homes. These weren't luxury condos, they were the Horizon homes, low-cost, sustainable housing for the families who kept the city running. "Remember, Kofi," Samuel said, his voice deep and steady, unaffected by the thunder rolling above. "A house is only as strong as the intent of the builder. If you cut corners here, you aren't just saving money, you're stealing the safety of a family." As he walked back to his car, his phone buzzed incessantly. It was his board of directors. Again. They wanted him to pivot. They wanted him to turn Horizon Homes into a gated community for the elite. "There is no ROI in charity," Samuel, his CFO, Marcus, had told him earlier that day. Samuel had simply looked at him and replied, "The return on investment is a child sleeping in a dry bed. That's enough for me." But as he pulled onto the rain-slicked highway, his heart felt heavy. He was tired. Tired of the boardroom battles, tired of the greed, and strangely, tired of the distance he felt growing between him and his wife, Lucy. He looked at the framed photo on his dashboard, Lucy, radiant in a silk dress at a gala. She was the queen of the city, a philanthropist and a socialite. He loved her, but lately, it felt like he was loving a statue, perfect, cold, and increasingly focused on the height of their social pedestal. The accident, metal and silence. The transition from life to the edge of death happened in less than 3 seconds. Samuel was navigating a treacherous curve when a massive freight truck, its brakes shrieking like a dying animal, hydroplaned across the median. The headlights blinded him, 2 twin sons of impending doom. Samuel yanked the wheel, but the asphalt was a sheet of oil. The impact was a symphony of violence. The sound of safety glass disintegrating sounded like a million tiny bells. The frame of the SUV, engineered for safety, groaned as it crumpled under the weight of the truck. Time fractured. Samuel felt the sudden, hot rush of an airbag, the smell of cordite and ozone, and then a searing, white-hot pain in his skull that felt like a lightning strike. As the car rolled, flipping twice before landing upside down in a ditch, Samuel's last thought wasn't about his billions or his housing projects. It was a desperate, silent plea, "Lucy, I'm not ready to leave you yet." Then, the world went silent. The hospital, the ghost in the machine. When consciousness returned, it didn't come with light. It came with the sound of a machine. Beep. 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 Samuel tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt like they had been welded shut. He tried to draw a breath, but a cold, plastic tube was forced down his throat, breathing for him. He tried to scream, but his vocal cords were paralyzed. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded his mind. Am I dead? Is this the grave? Blood pressure is stabilizing, a distant, professional voice said. It was Dr. Nathan Munsell. But the neural activity is concerning. He's in a grade 4 coma. There's severe swelling in the frontal lobe. He's essentially a passenger in his own body now. He might be able to hear us, but the connection between the brain and the motor functions is severed. Will he wake up? Another voice asked. It was a nurse, Thandi. Samuel recognized the kindness in her tone. It's unlikely, the doctor sighed. He's functionally a ghost. We'll keep him on life support, but the Chanda Empire is effectively leaderless tonight. Samuel wanted to reach out, to grab the doctor's coat. I'm here. I can hear you. I'm not a ghost. But he was locked in. He was a prisoner in a tomb made of skin and bone. The arrival of the widow. Hours passed. Or perhaps days. Time in the darkness is a liquid thing. Samuel learned to navigate by sound. He heard the hushed whispers of the janitors, the rhythmic squeak of the heart monitor, and the distant, muffled roar of the media circus outside the hospital gates. Then, he heard the sound that usually brought him the most joy, the sharp, rhythmic click-click-click of designer heels. The door to the VIP suite swung open. The scent of expensive jasmine and Chanel No. 5, Lucy's signature, filled the sterile air. Samuel felt his internal heart rate spike. Lucy. My light. She's here. She'll save me. He heard her walk to the side of the bed. He felt the mattress shift as she sat down. He waited for her to take his hand. He waited for the tears, for the "Sam, please don't leave me," for the warmth of her touch. Instead, he heard a long, weary sigh. The kind of sigh someone gives when they finally put down a heavy, unwanted box. Is the door locked, Marcus? Lucy's voice asked. It wasn't the trembling, melodic voice she used for the cameras. It was flat. Ice cold. Yes, a man's voice replied. Marcus. The CFO. The man Samuel had trusted with his books. The guards are outside. No one is coming in. Good, Lucy said. Samuel felt her hand touch his arm, but she didn't squeeze it. She pushed his arm aside as if it were a piece of meat so she could place her designer handbag on the nightstand. Look at him, Lucy murmured. The great Samuel Chanda. Reduced to a pile of broken bones and a ticking clock. Do you know how long I've waited for this silence, Marcus? For 10 years, I've had to listen to his speeches about humility and giving back. I've had to wear sensible clothes and visit slums so he could play the saint. Samuel's mind went numb. What is she saying? The lawyers are already drafting the emergency succession, Marcus said, his voice low and conspiratorial. If he stays like this for another 48 hours, the incapacitation clause kicks in. You'll have total control of the Chanda Group. We can kill the Horizon projects by Monday. We've already got buyers for the land, luxury developers out of Dubai. We'll triple our personal net worth in a single signature. Make it happen, Lucy said. She leaned down, her face so close to Samuel's that he could feel the ghost of her breath on his cheek. For a second, he thought she might kiss him. Instead, she whispered something that shattered the last of his heart. You always said you wanted to build something that lasted, Sam. Well, you did. You built a throne for me. And now that you're finally out of the way, I'm going to enjoy every second of it. If you can hear me in there, do me a favor. Don't wake up. If you die tonight, I'll finally be free. The decision. The room grew quiet as they began discussing the liquidation of his assets, the houses for the poor, the scholarships, the veteran programs. They talked about him as if he were already buried. Inside the darkness, Samuel Chanda's grief turned into something else. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a cold, incandescent rage. He realized that the accident hadn't been the end of his life, it was the beginning of his sight. He had been blind to the viper in his bed and the shark in his boardroom. He felt a spark. A tiny, microscopic electrical pulse at the tip of his right index finger. He didn't move it. He didn't signal the doctor. If they want a ghost, Samuel thought, I will be a ghost. I will stay in this darkness. I will listen to every plan, every betrayal, and every secret they whisper over my corpse. And when I finally open my eyes, they will wish I had died in that ditch. The billionaire was gone. The victim was gone. In that hospital bed, a judge was being born. The sound of humble footsteps. The hospital at 3 a.m. is a different world. The frantic energy of the day shifts into a heavy, echoing stillness, punctuated only by the mechanical sighs of ventilators and the distant, rhythmic hum of floor polishers. In the VIP suite, Samuel Chanda remained locked in his physical cage. His mind, however, was a razor-sharp instrument, recording every vibration in the room. The door creaked open. These weren't the sharp, aggressive clicks of Lucy's heels or the heavy, self-important tread of Marcus. These footsteps were soft, dragging slightly, the sound of someone who had spent decades on their feet. It was Silas, an elderly janitor with skin like weathered leather and eyes that had seen the city's highest peaks and lowest gutters. Samuel knew Silas. Years ago, when Samuel was first starting his construction empire, Silas had been a night watchman at one of the sites. When Silas's son had fallen ill, Samuel hadn't just paid the medical bills, he had ensured the boy had a scholarship. Silas didn't know the ghost in the bed was listening. He didn't care about the billions. He simply pulled up a plastic chair and sat in the shadows. I heard the news on the radio, Mr. Chanda, Silas whispered, his voice like dry leaves. They say you're gone. That the light's been turned off. But I don't believe it. A man who builds the way you do, you don't just blow out like a candle. Silas pulled a small, battered harmonica from his pocket. He didn't play a song, he just polished it with his sleeve. The nurses say your wife is a saint for staying by your side. But I've seen her when the cameras are off, Mr. Chanda. I see the way she looks at you. Like you're a piece of land she's waiting to subdivide. Samuel felt a surge of warmth. Here was the low-status man, the man the world ignored, offering more genuine humanity than the woman who had shared his bed. Don't let them take it from you, Silas murmured. The city needs a builder, not a predator. I'll be praying by the service elevator, Sam. You just keep fighting the dark. The shadow lovers. As Silas left, the atmosphere of the room curdled. The door opened again, and this time, the scent of expensive cigars and cold ambition preceded the visitors. Lucy was back, and she wasn't alone. Marcus, the CFO, was with her. Is the sedative still in his fore? Marcus asked, his voice low and vibrating with a predatory energy. The nurse doubled the dose on my orders, Lucy replied. Her voice had changed, it was no longer flat, it was flirtatious, a sickening contrast to the man dying in front of them. He's under. Deep under. Even if he could wake up, his brain is a fog. Samuel felt his blood turn to ice. They were drugging him. They weren't just waiting for him to die, they were actively ensuring he couldn't return. The board is wavering, Marcus muttered. Old man Henderson is asking for a second opinion from a specialist in Switzerland. If they fly someone in, they might realize that the brain swelling isn't as permanent as we're claiming. Then we move faster, Lucy snapped. She walked to the side of the bed. Samuel felt her cold fingers brush his forehead, but there was no tenderness in the gesture. It was the touch of a shopper checking the ripeness of fruit. We need his thumbprint, Marcus. The private vault in the basement of the estate. The legacy ledger is in there. If we have that, we don't need the board's approval for the offshore transfers. Samuel's mind raced. The legacy ledger contained the deeds to the Horizon homes and the secret trust funds for his employees' pensions. If they got that, thousands of families would be out on the street by morning. The cruelty of the test. Suddenly, Lucy stopped. Wait, she whispered. Did his eyelid just flicker? The silence in the room became absolute. Samuel stopped his internal monologue. He focused on one thing, be a statue. Be a stone. Be dead. I didn't see anything, Marcus said. No. I feel it. He's always been stubborn, Lucy hissed. He's the type of man who would survive a plane crash just to spite the pilot. Samuel felt her reach into her handbag. He heard the metallic snick of a small case opening. What are you doing? Marcus asked, sounding nervous. Testing the theory, Lucy replied. Samuel felt a sharp, searing pain in the webbing of his hand, between his thumb and forefinger. Lucy had taken a sewing pin from her kit and driven it deep into his flesh. The pain was incandescent. Every nerve in Samuel's body screamed for him to flinch, to pull away, to cry out. His heart rate monitor began to climb, 65. 72, 85. His heart rate is rising, Marcus whispered, panic creeping into his voice. It's a reflex, Lucy said, her voice devoid of any empathy. She twisted the pin. Come on, Samuel. If you're in there, show me. Show me so I can tell the doctor to turn the machines off right now. Samuel used every ounce of his will. He thought of Kofi at the construction site. He thought of Silas the janitor. He thought of the children who would have no homes if he failed. He forced his heart to slow down. He visualized a calm, still lake. He retreated into the furthest corner of his mind, detaching himself from the physical agony in his hand. 90, 80. 70, 62. The monitor stabilized. See. Lucy sighed, withdrawing the pin. Samuel felt the warm trickle of blood run down his palm, but he didn't move a muscle. He's gone, Marcus. He's just a biological machine keeping a bed warm. The theft of the thumbprint. With a chilling efficiency, Lucy grabbed Samuel's limp, bloodied hand. She took a small alcohol wipe, cleaned the blood from his thumb, and pressed it firmly against a mobile biometric scanner Marcus held out. Green light. Access granted. We have it, Marcus exhaled. The codes are ours. Tomorrow morning, the Chanda Group starts its new chapter, Lucy said, looking at her reflection in the darkened window of the hospital room. I'm going to tear down those horizon slums and build the most exclusive hotel in Africa. His legacy will be a footnote in my success story. They walked out, laughing softly, leaving Samuel alone in the dark with a hole in his hand and a fire in his soul. The unexpected witness. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had forgotten about the low-status man. From the shadows of the utility closet across the hall, Silas the janitor had seen it all through the cracked door. He hadn't heard everything, but he had seen the pin. He had seen the biometric scanner. And he had seen the way Lucy looked at her husband, not with grief, but with the hunger of a scavenger. Silas stepped out into the hallway as the elevator doors closed on Lucy and Marcus. He looked at the security guard, who was busy scrolling on his phone, ignoring his post. Silas didn't go back to his mop. He walked toward the nursing station where Thandi was finishing her notes. Nurse, Silas said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. I think you need to check on Mr. Chanda. And I think you need to check the security tapes from the last 10 minutes. There are wolves in this hospital, and they just bit the lion. Samuel, lying in the dark, felt a single tear escape the corner of his closed eye. He wasn't alone. The battle for his empire, and his life, had just found its first soldier. The sun rose over the city like a pale, uncaring eye, but for the thousands of workers at Chanda Group, the light felt thin. News had leaked, deliberately, that Samuel's condition had catastrophically declined. The stock price was shivering, and in the grand mahogany-lined boardroom on the 54th floor, the vultures were already circling the table. Elias Chanda, Samuel's younger brother, sat at the far end of the table. He looked nothing like a billionaire. His suit was a decade old, and his eyes were rimmed with red from a night of crying. Elias was the quiet Chanda, the one who ran the charity foundations and kept his boots dirty. He didn't have Samuel's charisma, and he certainly didn't have Lucy's ruthlessness. We cannot wait for a miracle, Elias, Lucy said, her voice dripping with a fake, honeyed sorrow. She was dressed in a black silk suit that cost more than a teacher's yearly salary. The banks are calling in the loans for the Horizon projects. Without Samuel's signature, the company is paralyzed. For the sake of the shareholders, I am moving for an immediate vote of interim total authority. You're talking about an execution, not an interim vote. Elias stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. Samuel is still breathing. The doctor said he needs time. You're trying to sell the waterfront and the housing trust before his body is even cold. Marcus, the CFO, let out a dry, mocking laugh. Elias, you've always been the dreamer. But look at the reality. Samuel is a vegetable. Every day we wait, we lose millions. Lucy is his wife, his partner. She has his thumbprint authorization for the private vaults. What do you have? Elias felt a cold knot of dread. The thumbprint. Samuel would never have given that to her while he was conscious. How did you get that? He whispered. He gave it to me, Lucy lied, her eyes meeting Elias's with a terrifying blankness. On the night of the accident. He knew he was fading. He trusted me. Unlike you, Elias, he knew who was actually capable of leading. The board members, men in gray suits who valued balance sheets over human lives, began to murmur. They didn't see a grieving widow, they saw a strong woman ready to protect their dividends. The humiliation was complete. Elias was voted out of the meeting, his security badge deactivated before he even reached the lobby. The nurse's discovery. Back at the hospital, the war was being fought with different weapons. Nurse Thandi was performing Samuel's morning checkup. She was meticulous, moving with a quiet reverence that the other nurses lacked. As she cleaned Samuel's right hand, she stopped. Her breath hitched. There, in the webbing between his thumb and forefinger, was a tiny, inflamed puncture wound. There was a faint bruise around it, shaped like a cruel pinch. What is this? She whispered to herself. It's a snake bite, a voice said from the doorway. Thandi jumped. Silas the janitor was standing there, his mop bucket trailing behind him. He looked over his shoulder, ensuring the guard was still distracted by a football match on his tablet. I saw it, nurse, Silas whispered, stepping into the room. Last night. The wife, she stuck him with a needle. She wanted to see if he'd jump. And when he didn't, she used a machine on his thumb. She's not here to save him, Thandi. She's here to skin him alive. Thandi looked at Samuel's still, bandaged face. A wave of nausea hit her. She had seen families fight over inheritance before, but this was different. This was a hunt. If she's drugging him to keep him under, Thandi reasoned, her mind racing, then we need to flush his system. But the orders come from Dr. Munsa, and Lucy pays his consulting fees. I'll be fired, or worse, if I interfere with the four. Then don't interfere with the four, Silas said, his eyes gleaming with a surprising sharpness. Give him a reason to come back. Talk to him. Not like a patient. Like a man who's about to lose everything he loves. The first blink. Inside the darkness, Samuel heard it all. The betrayal in the boardroom. The puncture wound. The bravery of the janitor. He felt a surge of energy, a white-hot spark of adrenaline that fought against the heavy, chemical fog in his blood. I need to signal her, he thought. I can't move my hand. I can't speak. But my eyes. He focused every ounce of his soul on his left eyelid. It felt like trying to lift a mountain with a piece of thread. The chemical sedatives were like lead weights, pulling him back into the abyss. For Elias. For the families in the Horizon homes. Move. Thandi was leaning over him, adjusting the oxygen mask. Mr. Chanda, she whispered, her voice trembling. If you can hear me, if Silas is right, please. Just give me a sign. Anything. I'll risk my job for you, but I need to know you're in there. Samuel fought. He visualized the ghost inside him reaching out and prying his eyelid open. A tremor. A microscopic flicker. Thandi gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Silas. Look. The eyelid fluttered again. Then, with an agonizing slowness, Samuel's left eye opened just a fraction. It wasn't the vacant stare of a comatose man. It was a sharp, burning focus. 1-4, yes, 2-4, no, Thandi whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Are you being drugged? Blink. Do you know what Lucy is doing? Blink. Do you trust me? Samuel paused. He looked into Thandi's eyes, eyes that were filled with genuine terror and even greater courage. Blink. The shadow over the bed. The moment of triumph was short-lived. The heavy click of the door lock announced a visitor. Silas immediately began mopping the floor near the bathroom, and Thandi turned to the monitors, her face a mask of professional boredom. Lucy walked in, followed by a man Samuel didn't recognize, a lawyer holding a thick stack of documents. How is he today, nurse? Lucy asked, her voice light, almost cheerful. She didn't wait for an answer. She walked to the bed and looked down at Samuel. His eye was closed again, his face a perfect mask of nothingness. He's the same, Mrs. Chanda, Thandi said, her voice steady despite the sweat cooling on her neck. Stable, but unresponsive. Good. Well, not good, but expected, Lucy corrected herself with a chilling smile. She turned to the lawyer. We'll do it now. The final directives. If he can't sign, I'll use the thumbprint authorization we secured yesterday to bypass the witness requirement. The lawyer looked uneasy. Mrs. Chanda, the board is already questioning the validity of the first transfer. If we do this, and he, by some miracle, wakes up. Lucy leaned over Samuel, her silk scarf brushing against his chin. He isn't waking up, Robert. I've made sure of that. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, the company will be a shell, the assets will be in my name, and Samuel will be moved to that quiet facility in the mountains. No visitors. No phones. Just a nice, long sleep. She reached for his hand. Samuel felt her cold fingers wrap around his wrist. He felt the weight of the pen being pressed into his lifeless fingers. She was going to force his hand to scrawl a signature that would end his life's work. Not today, Samuel thought. Not today. As Lucy began to guide his hand toward the paper, Samuel did something he hadn't done since the accident. He didn't blink. He didn't twitch. He let out a long, low, rattling breath, a death rattle he had seen in old movies. Lucy froze. The lawyer stepped back, dropping his briefcase. What was that? Lucy hissed, her face pale. He's crashing. Thandi shouted, lunging for the code blue button. Get out. I need the crash cart. Now. In the chaos of the fake emergency, Thandi shoved Lucy and the lawyer out of the room. As the door slammed shut, Thandi turned to Samuel. He wasn't crashing. His heart rate on the monitor was perfectly steady. He opened both eyes. That was a good trick, Mr. Chanda, Thandi whispered, wiping her brow. But she'll be back with the doctor. We have 1 hour before they realize you're fine. What do we do? Samuel couldn't speak, but he looked at the tray beside his bed where Thandi's smartphone lay. He looked at it, then at her. You want to record something? She asked. Blink. A message for Elias? Blink. The hunt was no longer one-sided. The ghost had found a way to speak, and the saint was about to find out that a cornered lion is the most dangerous thing in the world. Elias Chanda sat on a park bench across from the gleaming Chanda Group headquarters, his world in ruins. In his pocket was a formal notice of his removal from the family estate. Lucy had moved with terrifying speed, by sunset, he would be legally barred from seeing his brother. He felt small, powerless, a low-status shadow of the man Samuel was. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent a video file. Elias clicked it, expecting a threat or a legal notice. Instead, the screen showed a dimly lit hospital room. The camera was shaky, held by someone who was clearly terrified. The lens focused on a pale, bandaged face. "Sam." Elias whispered, his breath hitching. In the video, Samuel's eyes were wide open. They weren't empty, they were burning with an intensity that made Elias tremble. Samuel didn't speak, but he looked directly into the camera. His left eye blinked once. Then twice. Then a long pause, followed by a series of rapid blinks. "It's Morse code," Elias realized, his heart hammering against his ribs. He remembered the long summers they spent as children in the village, playing with old flashlights and learning the code from their grandfather. He pulled out a pen and a crumpled receipt, frantically decoding the message. "Lucy, Druggngi, Vult, SignaturiFake." The video ended with a final, desperate message, "Find, Janitor." Elias stood up, the despair vanishing from his face. He wasn't the little brother anymore. He was a soldier. But as he looked up at the headquarters, he saw Lucy standing on the balcony of the penthouse, looking down at the city like a queen surveying her conquest. She looked untouchable. To beat her, Elias couldn't walk through the front door. He had to go through the service entrance. The traitor in the white coat. Back at the hospital, the air had turned poisonous. Dr. Nathan Munsa, the man Samuel had once praised as the finest surgeon in the country, walked into the VIP suite. He wasn't alone. Lucy was with him, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Nurse Thandi," the doctor said, his voice unusually sharp. "I've been reviewing the heart monitor logs from the Code Blue incident earlier. The readings don't match a cardiac event. In fact, they look remarkably like someone was holding their breath." Thandi kept her back to them, meticulously organizing the medicine cart. "It was a respiratory spasm, doctor. In coma patients, the diaphragm can sometimes—" "Don't lie to me," Dr. Munsa interrupted, stepping closer. He lowered his voice. "I know how much Samuel paid for your brother's tuition, Thandi. I know you feel a sense of loyalty. But loyalty doesn't pay the mortgage when you lose your license. Mrs. Chanda is concerned that you are overstimulating the patient." Lucy stepped forward, her floral perfume clashing with the smell of antiseptic. She looked at Samuel, then at Thandi. "I want him moved. Tonight. There's a private clinic in the Northern Hills, specialized care. It's more secluded." Samuel heard the name, specialized care, and felt a jolt of terror. He knew that place. It wasn't a clinic, it was a dumping ground for the wealthy to hide their inconvenient relatives. Once he was there, he would never be seen again. "But Mrs. Chanda," Thandi pleaded, her voice cracking. "The transport could kill him. His brain pressure hasn't stabilized." "Then let it be on your head if he doesn't survive the trip," Lucy said, her voice a cold whisper. She leaned over Samuel, her eyes searching his face for any sign of life. "He's been a burden long enough. Pack his things." The undercover brother. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a man in an oversized, stained blue jumpsuit pushed a trash cart through the hospital's basement. It was Elias. He had spent his last bit of cash to buy the uniform from a worker at a nearby construction site. He found the service elevator. His heart raced as he reached the VIP floor. He knew the guards would recognize him if he showed his face, so he kept his head down, clutching a tattered mop. "Hey! You," a voice barked. Elias froze. A security guard, one of Marcus's hired goons, was walking toward him. "The trash isn't collected until midnight. What are you doing up here?" Spill in the supply closet, Elias mumbled, mimicking the gravelly accent of the street workers he had spent years with. Nurse said it was an emergency. Bleach and blood. The guard sneered, looking at Elias with the same disdain people usually reserved for the low-status workers. Pathetic. Get it done and get out. And don't go near room 402. The lady inside doesn't like the smell of poor people. Elias nodded and scurried toward the supply closet. Inside, he found Silas. The two men stood in the dark, surrounded by mops and buckets. "You're the brother," Silas said, recognizing the eyes. "Sam told me you'd come." Not with words, but with that look he gets when he's building a bridge. "He knows you're the only one who can stop her." "They're moving him, Silas," Elias whispered urgently. "To a facility called specialized care. If they get him in that ambulance, he's as good as dead." Silas nodded grimly. "Then we don't let him get in the ambulance. But we can't fight him with fists, boy. We need the truth. And the truth is in that legacy ledger she took. She thinks she has the only copy, but Sam was a builder, he always had a backup. The ambush of the soul." The move was scheduled for 8 p.m. The private ambulance arrived, its lights flashing silently. Marcus was there, supervising the orderlies. Lucy stood by the window, watching the rain start to fall again. "Everything is ready," Marcus whispered. "The papers are signed. Once he's in the hills, the board will have no choice but to confirm your permanent status." They began to unhook the machines. The rhythmic beep, beep, of the heart monitor slowed, then stopped as the portable units took over. Thandi stood in the corner, her eyes wet with tears, her hands trembling as she held a syringe. "What is that?" Lucy asked, pointing at the syringe. "A sedative for the journey, ma'am," Thandi lied, her voice shaking. "To prevent seizures during transport." In reality, it was a high-dose stimulant, the only thing Thandi could find to counter the drugs Dr. Munsa had been pumping into Samuel. It was a gamble. If it worked, Samuel would wake up. If it failed, his heart would explode. As the orderlies began to slide Samuel's bed toward the door, Thandi moved. She tripped, purposely, and as she fell against the bed, she plunged the needle into Samuel's thigh. "You clumsy fool!" Lucy screamed. But it was too late. The medicine was in his system. Samuel felt a roar in his ears. It was like a dam breaking. The fog in his brain didn't just lift, it was incinerated. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, not with fear, but with power. He didn't open his eyes. Not yet. He waited. He waited until they reached the elevator. He waited until the doors closed, leaving only Lucy, Marcus, and the two orderlies in the small, cramped space. Finally, Lucy sighed, leaning against the elevator wall. "After tonight, I never have to look at his pathetic, saintly face again. Marcus, remind me to have the house redecorated. I want every trace of him gone by Friday." Suddenly, a hand, strong, calloused, and very much alive, reached out and gripped Lucy's wrist. The scream she let out was primal. Samuel Chanda didn't just open his eyes, he sat up. The portable monitors began to scream as his vitals spiked into the red. He looked at Lucy, his face a mask of cold, terrifying justice. "The redecorating can wait, Lucy," Samuel rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "Because you aren't going to be living there anymore." The elevator doors opened, but they weren't at the ground floor. They were back on the VIP wing, and standing there, with the hospital's head of security and a group of police officers, was Elias, holding a tablet that was live-streaming every word of the elevator conversation to the entire Chanda Group board of directors. The silence in the elevator was not peaceful, it was heavy, suffocating, and charged with the electricity of a nightmare coming to life. Lucy Chanda stared at the hand gripping her wrist. It was a hand she had seen lifeless for days. It was a hand she had pricked with a pin and used as a tool for forgery. Now, it was a vice. She looked up, her breath hitching in a jagged sob of pure, unadulterated terror, only to find Samuel's eyes fixed on her. They weren't the eyes of a husband, they were the eyes of a judge. You're supposed to be. Lucy's voice died in her throat, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. I'm supposed to be a memory, aren't I, Lucy? Samuel's voice was a low, gravelly rasp, each word sounding like it was being pulled through gravel, yet it carried the weight of a thunderclap. He didn't let go of her wrist. Instead, he pulled her closer, his gaze never wavering. I heard every word. Every consulting fee. Every letting go. Every insult you hurled at the people who actually built this city. Marcus, the CFO, tried to bolt toward the back of the elevator, but the doors slid open to reveal a wall of blue uniforms and the flashing lenses of a dozen cameras. Elias stood in the center, his jaw set, holding a tablet that was still broadcasting the feed. The members of the board of directors, connected via a global video conference, were visible on the screen, their faces a mosaic of shock and disgust. They had heard it all, the plan to drug him, the plan to sell the housing projects, and the utter lack of remorse. The performance fails. Lucy, ever the opportunist, tried to pivot. It was a reflex born of years of social climbing. She collapsed to her knees, her eyes instantly welling with tears that looked practiced and hollow. Samuel. Oh, praise God. It's a miracle. I was just speaking out of grief, I didn't know what I was saying. I was so scared of losing you that I lost my mind. Samuel looked down at her, his expression unchanged. He didn't pull her up. He didn't offer a hand of comfort. He looked at the police officers and gestured toward Marcus. Officer, you'll find a mobile biometric scanner in that man's pocket. It contains the illegal authorization of my thumbprint, taken while I was sedated. You'll also find the documents for the offshore transfer of the Horizon Trust funds. Marcus began to stammer, his arrogance evaporating. I was just following orders. She threatened me. She said she'd frame me for the accident. Save it for the deposition, Marcus, Elias said, stepping into the elevator. He reached out and helped Samuel into a wheelchair provided by a waiting Thandi. The brothers shared a look, a silent communication that spanned their entire lives. The little brother had held the line, and the lion was back to finish the fight. The public dismantling. As the police led Marcus and a hysterical, screaming Lucy toward the service exit to avoid the main media scrum, Samuel stopped them. No, he said, his voice gaining strength. Take them through the lobby. Let the world see the face of the devoted widow now. Let the workers she called filth see exactly who was trying to steal their futures. The walk through the hospital lobby was a spectacle of instant karma. The very cameras Lucy had used to cultivate her image as a grieving saint were now turned against her like searchlights. She tried to hide her face behind her designer handbag, the same bag she had used to hide the pin she used to torture Samuel, but there was no hiding from the truth. The socialites who had whispered their condolences now pulled away as if she were contagious. The board members who had been ready to sign over the company were now busy drafting statements of deepest regret and unwavering loyalty to Samuel Chanda. It was a masterclass in the fickleness of status, and Samuel watched it all with a cold, quiet understanding. Honoring the unseen. Once the chaos had been cleared, Samuel didn't return to his VIP suite. Instead, he asked Elias to wheel him into the hospital's small, quiet chapel. He called for 3 people, Elias, Nurse Thandi, and Silas the janitor. The room was humble, a far cry from the glass and steel boardrooms where Samuel usually spent his days. He looked at Thandi, who was still wearing her uniform, her eyes bright with the realization that she had saved a life and perhaps changed the city's history. He looked at Silas, who stood awkwardly in the corner, clutching his mop as if it were a weapon he wasn't sure he should be holding. They tell me, Samuel began, looking at Silas, that the world is built by men in suits. They tell me that power lives in bank accounts and titles. But for the last week, I was a man with nothing. I was a low-status body in a bed, unable to speak or defend myself. He turned his gaze to Thandi. My wife, a woman of high status, wanted me dead. My CFO, a man of high status, wanted to rob me. But a nurse who remembered a kindness I did for her brother, and a man who mops the floors because he believes in honest work, you were the ones who saw me. You were the ones who fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Samuel reached into his robe and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, the card Silas had tucked into his hand days ago. Silas, you told me the city needs a builder, not a predator. You were right. From this day forward, the Chanda Group is changing. We aren't just building houses, we're building a legacy of respect. The first act of the new era. Before the night was over, Samuel made his first official decree as the return chairman. He didn't call the newspapers, he called the foreman at the Horizon Homes site. Double the shifts, Samuel ordered. And I want the quality of the materials upgraded. We aren't just meeting the code, we're exceeding it. And the foreman's position? It's being renamed. From now on, the site oversight will be handled by our new Director of Community Integrity. He looked at Silas. I think you've watched over enough sites in your life to know when a foundation is solid, Silas. The job is yours. Silas's hands shook as he took the offer. I'm just a janitor, Mr. Chanda. No, Silas, Samuel replied firmly. You're the man who saved the builder. That makes you the most important man in this company. As for Thandi, Samuel didn't just give her a promotion, he announced the creation of the Thandi Moyo Foundation for Patient Advocacy, a multi-million-dollar initiative to ensure that no patient, regardless of their status, would ever be silenced or mistreated in a hospital again. The final blow to Lucy. But the karma wasn't finished. As Lucy sat in a cold holding cell, stripped of her silk suit and her jewelry, her lawyer entered with a grim expression. I can get you out on bail, the lawyer said. But there's a problem. Samuel didn't just file for divorce. He invoked the public scandal clause in your prenuptial agreement. Every asset you thought you had, the villas, the accounts, the jewelry, it's all been frozen and diverted into a trust for the families of the Horizon Project. You're broke, Lucy. And because of the evidence of the drugging, the state is looking at attempted murder. Lucy stared at the concrete wall of her cell. For years, she had looked down on people like Silas and Thandi, believing her wealth made her a different species. Now, she was the one at the bottom, and the very man she had tried to erase was the one ensuring she would never rise again. 1 year after the screeching tires and the shattered glass that nearly ended his life, Samuel Chanda stood at the edge of the city's newest neighborhood. This wasn't a collection of luxury high-rises or cold, gated communities. This was Horizon Valley, a vibrant, sprawling testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The sun was high, warming the faces of hundreds of families who were holding keys to their first homes. These were the workers, the teachers, the janitors, and the nurses who kept the city's heart beating. As Samuel looked out over the crowd, he didn't see low-status individuals, he saw the pillars of society. He no longer wore the tailored Italian suits that had once been his armor. Today, he wore a simple linen shirt and the same boots he had been wearing the night of the accident, boots that still bore the faint, red dust of the earth. But as the celebration began, a black sedan pulled up at the edge of the crowd. A woman stepped out, escorted by a social worker. She was dressed in a tattered, faded coat, her hair unkempt, her eyes hollow and filled with a desperate, frantic hunger. It was Lucy. She wasn't there as a guest of honor. She was there as a resident of the city's transitional housing program, a program Samuel had funded using the very assets he had stripped from her during their divorce. The crowd didn't recognize her. To them, she was just another person in need. The irony was a silent, suffocating weight. The woman who had once looked down on the poor was now surviving on their grace. The final trial, the weight of a whisper. The path to this day had been paved with the cold stones of justice. Months earlier, the courtroom had been packed for the trial of Lucy Chanda and Marcus Thorne. It was the most televised event in the country's history. The prosecution had presented the digital recordings from Nurse Thandi's phone and the legacy ledger recovered by Elias. But the most devastating piece of evidence wasn't a document, it was Samuel's testimony. When Samuel took the stand, the room fell so silent you could hear the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked directly at Lucy. "I didn't lose my life in that accident," Samuel had said, his voice steady and devoid of malice. "I lost my blindness. For years, I believed that love was a given and that my wealth was a shield. But in the darkness of that hospital room, I learned that the only thing that truly shields a man is his character. You didn't just try to kill me, Lucy. You tried to kill the hope of every person who believed in the work we were doing." Lucy had tried to play the victim one last time, claiming she was manipulated by Marcus. But Marcus, facing 20 years for corporate fraud and attempted murder, had turned on her instantly. He provided the emails, the offshore account numbers, and the recordings of her saying she wished Samuel had died in the ditch. The instant karma wasn't just the prison sentence, it was the total, public annihilation of her vanity. She was sentenced to 10 years of community service and the forfeiture of every cent she had ever taken from the Chanda estate. She left the court in handcuffs, the same cameras she had once courted now capturing her descent into disgrace. The promotion of the humble. As the ribbon-cutting ceremony at Horizon Valley commenced, Samuel didn't take center stage. Instead, he stepped back and called two people forward, Silas and Thandi. "The world measures success by how many people serve you," Samuel told the crowd, his voice amplified by the speakers. "But real success is measured by how many people you are willing to serve when no one is watching. A year ago, I was a man who couldn't move. I was a man who most people would have ignored. But these two, a nurse and a man with a mop, they didn't see a billionaire. They saw a human being in pain. They risked their livelihoods, their safety, and their reputations to save me." He handed the ceremonial scissors to Silas. The elderly man, now the director of community integrity for the entire Chanda group, looked at the gold-plated blades with tears in his eyes. He wasn't just a janitor anymore, he was the moral compass of an empire. Next to him, Thandi, the head of the city's new patient advocacy board, stood tall, her uniform replaced by a professional blazer, her confidence a beacon of hope for every young girl in the crowd. Together, they cut the ribbon, and the air was filled with the cheers of people who finally felt seen. A moment of grace in the shadows. Later that afternoon, as the festivities wound down, Samuel saw Lucy standing near the food tents. She was staring at a fountain in the center of the square, a fountain dedicated to the unsung heroes of the city. She looked like a ghost haunting her own former life. Samuel walked toward her. His security team moved to intervene, but he waved them back. He stood beside her in silence for a long moment. "I have nothing left, Samuel," she whispered, not looking at him. "You took everything." "I didn't take anything that wasn't already hollow, Lucy," Samuel replied softly. "I gave you a life built on truth, but you preferred a life built on shadows. You used to call people like Silas filth. Now, those are the people who are feeding you, clothing you, and giving you a place to sleep. The irony isn't that you're poor. The irony is that you're finally being treated with the respect you refuse to give others." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, plastic rosary, the one Joe, the homeless man, had left in his hand in the hospital. He placed it in Lucy's trembling hand. "Keep this. It's a reminder that no matter how low you fall, there is always a way back. But you have to start by looking up, not looking down." As Samuel walked away, he didn't feel the weight of the past. He felt light. He felt the resilience of a man who had survived the worst of humanity to find the best of it. The final lesson, the builder's prayer. The story of Samuel Chanda became a legend in the city, but not because of his billions. It became a legend because of the 6 minutes of silence, the period every year on the anniversary of his awakening, where every Chanda construction site stops work. For 6 minutes, from the highest executive to the newest apprentice, everyone stands in silence to remember that every person they encounter is carrying a world within them. Elias, now the CEO of the Chanda Group's non-profit arm, joined Samuel on the balcony of their new, modest office. They looked out at a city that was slowly changing, one brick, one home, and one heart at a time. "You did it, Sam," Elias said, leaning against the railing. "You built something that will outlast us both." "We built it, Elias," Samuel corrected him. "And we didn't build it with money. We built it with the one thing the world forgets too often, the understanding that everyone, the man on the street, the nurse in the hall, the worker in the mud, deserves to be heard. Because sometimes, the most powerful voice in the world is the one that speaks when everyone else thinks no one is listening." The camera pans out over the city, showing the lights of the Horizon Valley homes flickering on, one by one. It's a tapestry of light, a map of lives restored. The people's billionaire had lost his empire of gold, but he had found an empire of the soul, and in that empire, everyone was royalty.